Welcome to Mormon Land, where we explore news in and about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm Senior Religion Reporter Peggy Fletcher-Stack. Joining me is Senior Managing Editor David Noyce, who oversees our faith coverage. Hi, Dave.
Hello, Peggy.
Before we start, here's a quick ask. We invite you to go to patreon.com, where you can access all the Tribune's faith coverage, ad-free podcast episodes, and the full Mormon Land newsletter. Again, that's Patreon, patreon.com/MormonLand. And if you haven't already, follow us on Instagram at mormon.land. Now for today's show. Ronell Hugh says he was recently hiking on a trail in Highland, Utah, when a white man in a gray truck leaned out his window and shouted a racist threat. It was a moment both startling and deeply troubling for the president of the Genesis Group, a support organization for Black Latter-day Saints. Hugh hadn't been threatened like that before since living in the Beehive State. But he had heard lots of stories from other members of his Black congregation who told him that racism has been on the rise due to the current political climate in the country, as well as in Utah, where the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the dominant religious institution. Hugh, a marketing executive who most recently worked for church-owned Deseret Book, joins us in studio today to discuss how this racial tension has affected the Genesis Group and what the organization is doing to counter it. Ronell, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, first tell us about your recent encounter while hiking.
Yeah, I have been on a journey over the last couple months, but just really trying to get out, more cardio and just kind of doing that. So I was out on a Saturday. It was May 2nd, and I was heading back home after being out for about 30 minutes or so. And close to my home, I just was walking in, and typically where I'm at, I actually coach soccer, so I coach right there where that field's at. And I just heard somebody yell. And I'm like, oh, they must be yelling what's happening over here on the field because there's a soccer game and there's a lot of noise. But I was like, so I looked up and saw the vehicle. And then I looked to my left. And as I was looking to the left where the field was at, where people were playing soccer, it just registered the words. The words that all N-words will hang, right? All N-word will hang. And I was struck, I was like, wait a second, this person's talking to me. They're communicating this to me, and I just was, I was startled more than anything, and then I just was like, had to catch myself in kind of what they had said. And, you don't expect that at 8:55 or whatever time it was, but it was somewhere between 8:55 and 8:57 in the morning when you're just out for a casual walk. But that's what took place, and, it's been an interesting journey, I would say, since then.
So you weren't doing anything with other people or anything that would trigger this person?
Not at all. Just walking and, on a trail. The Murdoch Trail goes all the way from the point of the mountain all the way down to Provo Canyon. So that it's kind of right by my house. And so I get on there and walk and run that.
So you're in your neighborhood, essentially.
I'm literally, I was 5 minutes from my home.
Wow.
So hiking while Black.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what did you do immediately after that?
So immediately after, I kind of ran down the trail and kind of up the hill because where it took place, it's kind of like an embankment. And so in some of the pictures I sent, you can kind of see behind. But it's kind of like, you're standing there, you're looking up at vehicles. So I ran down to see if I could find where it had turned. And I couldn't see it. I wanted to get a picture. And if I was smart, I would just ran through all the brush that was there. But I was like, no, I'm just going to run down and see if I can catch it. But that's what I did. And then I went home, told my wife. And then I came back and recorded the video where I kind of shared what took place because I was like, I have to capture it now while it's fresh in my mind. But that's what I did, and so and then it was just it went from there where I'm like, okay, I got to share this. I'm one of those people that's, when I talk to people at Genesis Group, what I've learned over the last 2.5 years is that a lot of not just Black Latter-day Saints, but I've talked to Latinos, I've talked to Polynesians, I've talked to Asians, they just keep it to themselves. They don't share these stories because, first of all, sometimes people say, we don't believe you. And they just they keep it. I was talking to some people last night about this, and I was like, my thing has been, I am going to share it. I actually spoke at Genesis Group in February where I said, stand for truth with compassion. And that's been my effort since this experience. I'm going to stand for truth with compassion. And this is not okay.
You reported it to police.
I did, yes.
Have you heard anything on an investigation, anything on that?
Yeah, so they've gone, they've tried to find camera footage. They only have a few. There's one camera that's kind of right where it happened, but it's pointing down at a water I don't know what it is, but it's like a water facility they have there, but it's pointing down at it. So they couldn't capture anything off of that. And so they're investigating it. It's the same, actually, police, the Lone Peak Police Organization. They've been great. They're the ones that, a few months ago, actually it was October, where somebody had a sign in Alpine that says F N-word. And so they've investigated that one. So they're kind of involved, and they do a great job. They've actually been great.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, they haven't been able to find anything. So.
Yeah. So what has the reaction you've received since sharing your story?
I wouldn't say I'm prolific on social media, but I share these types of things on social media, and that it's been interesting to see the conversations there. Which I don't really. For me, it's like I put it out there. I mean, people can say what they want, right? It's been interesting though from that, just the reception and people saying this is not okay. We have to do something. We have to do more. We have to be better. From a few family members, it's been my family, of course, my mom, my brother, my siblings. It's been great for my wife's family. There's been a few that have reached out to say, hey, this is not okay, and they vocalized that. And then just broadly and generally from the community, it's been positive. My church leaders have been great. They're like, we're behind you. We support you. And even this morning I got a text from one of my counselors in Genesis group where his leaders in his ward had read the article, and they said, what can we do? What can we do? Come talk. Let's figure out what can we do in our area to help with this. And so it's been interesting to see, right? You obviously get the negative too, like, do you have any proof? Like, you're this person, you're like, and I'm like, yeah, it's easy to say, right? Because in those moments, I'm not gonna, like, I literally walk around now. I have an Insta360 that I bought when I travel that I walk with now and run with. That if anything happens, I can just push it because it goes on like that. But I'm like, I didn't have it with me that morning. I usually actually don't even have my phone with me.
You're just going for a hike.
I'm just going for a hike. I usually have, my watch, and I'm not expecting to have to.
You're just counting your steps, right?
Yeah. And so, but I think there was, it's been great. And I think even within the Genesis group, I think what people don't understand, like this type of attack, when you say all, it's not just me. Like the impact on my daughter, my kids, like my daughter's saying, we don't know if dad should go running in the morning by himself anymore. And I don't think people understand that. Like and I think it's easy to say, well, you shouldn't talk about it, or you shouldn't share it, or why are you saying it's all these people? Like, okay, I live in Highland. It's, when I spoke to the mayor, it's 98% LDS. So I guess there's a 2% chance it wasn't somebody that's LDS. I'll give you that. But I'm like, I'm a smart guy. I went to college. Statistics would tell you, like, okay, that's going to be pretty slim, right? Okay, it's 2%. And I'm not blaming. It's not an organization. It's not a church for me. It's like, but there are people. I've had experiences enough where I live, for my kids, for myself, where these are people that I probably go to church with, right? That are in my area. And so it's been interesting to see from that kind of the defensiveness sometimes from folks, and the protectiveness of, like, and it's interesting because then in the Black community, when we talk about it, like, what they're either defending themselves or an institution, or they just don't want to admit that they have some deep rooted things that they need to work through, that they need to themselves abandon and kind of like work through in terms of attitudes that they have.
I did notice on your social media posts that some people saying, well, this I'm sure wasn't an LDS person. I've never heard of any incident. It's serious. Didn't you see some of those on your Facebook page? Okay, let's back up and just give us a little background about you. How did you come to join the church? I know you're a convert.
Yeah. I grew up all over, born in Germany, lived there for 8 years, was Christian Catholic as a little kid there. When I was about 7 or 8, we moved to North Carolina, which is where my dad's from. Southern Baptist. We went to a bunch of different churches there. Sometimes my mom and my dad would put us on a bus and they wouldn't go, but we would go to church. I grew up just going to church. And so then my aunt was a Jehovah's Witness. And so she came over to North Carolina once and introduced us to Jehovah's Witnesses. And so we practiced with them for a year and a half. And then in 1990, moved to England, and we were there living with my grandmother, and had an unfortunate event where we had some disruption in our life. And so we found ourselves in a homeless shelter for, 4 or 5 months. And it was, as a little kid, 12-year-old, you're just kind of like, it's kind of one of those moments that kind of sticks in your mind. And after we got out of that experience and we were put in government housing in England, we lived in Coventry, which is in central England. And we my dad was like, we need to find a church again. And so he would go out. I remember going to a few different churches in England, or big cathedrals, and then he stumbled across some sister missionaries. And so he met with, like, my mom was a little kind of like, really? Because my aunt's Jehovah's Witness, so she was like, okay, we were going to do this. And so, but it was great. Like, they came and they shared the gospel with us. And for me, it was just like, I had always believed in Jesus because that's how I grew up. And I knew that kind of this whole idea of being a child of God was an important part. And I just think that way about all people. But then just the emphasis of that when the missionaries came and taught us was just such a critical part for me. I was like, yeah. And then they talked about prophets and apostles, and, you know, and I've always believed that. I mean, I grew up on the Old Testament. And so you go up on the Old Testament and you kind of like, it's littered with prophets, right? Obviously the New Testament being with more apostles, but it's like, that's how I grew up. So I'm like, and for me, that was just, it felt right. And so that was 1993, June of 1993. And then, yeah, we slowly have moved progressively west, I guess. I mean, we moved from there to North Carolina, and I started a mission in Utah from 98 to 2000 in the Ogden mission, which was a unique experience. I think part of my experience as a missionary was not just teaching people, but giving people exposure to people that were Black. There's many areas I served in, small towns, where people were like, we've never had a Black person here before. I'm like, okay. You know, and so it just was happening. So I joined the church in 93. My parents did. I had 3 siblings that were old enough that did. And I had a younger sister. And so we all came in together, and you know, we've been there. Everybody's on their own journey right now, which is totally great. I mean, some of us are participating, some of us are not, and for me, it's all the same. Did you know about the church's former priesthood temple ban before you joined the church? No, I didn't actually. It was actually on my mission where I had an interesting experience. I served on Weber State campus, and I was around that area, and we had some Jehovah's Witnesses stop by, and we were talking, and they're like, you know, they didn't give you guys the priesthood, and I'm like, what? And that was the first I'd heard of it. And they're like, well, how can you belong to, and then I had multiple people say, how can you belong to a church that didn't give you the priesthood? And, you know, for me, I'm like, how my faith works for me is like, once I have a confirmation of something, how I feel it, like, I can't deny it, you know? And so I that's all I had to go with. And then I met a seminary teacher in Brigham City when I was serving there. And he gave me, I still have the papers today. He gave me all this research that he had done. He was a convert to the church for some reason. I can't remember his name, but he went to BYU as somebody who wasn't a member of the church. So I'm like, that's so interesting to me, right? But he did, and but he sat me down and shared a lot with me about that. And it was super eye opening, you know. And I didn't dig a lot into it until probably years later, you know. Probably wasn't until 2016, even 20, like, and just because I was like, hey, I can look through this, but I did it. I started doing more research in 2020, 2013, and then after, right? But I didn't know, you know, much like. You know, there's some research that the BYU sociology department has done, and I'm not sure if you've looked at that, but they talked about how a significant number of Black members didn't find out to their mission, which I think is interesting, right? I also did, like, when I was there when they're presenting it, there was a woman there who had shared that one of the things that they do in Africa now is they share this with people in Africa to help them understand the background and this part of it. But no one had ever, like, no one ever shared it with
Do you think they should have before you joined? Or,
you know, I actually think it would. I think it is definitely appropriate. I think everybody, and not just me as a person that is Black, but I think everybody should know that history, you know, because I think you should be well informed. You know, for me as somebody who's Black, I think it would be important. It would have been important because, like, hey, that gives me full context. Like, what am I stepping into? What am I joining? How is this received today? Like, what are people's perspectives on this today? But it would have been beneficial for me.
So when you were on your mission here in Utah, did you experience any racial slurs, as you say, I mean, this is a predominantly white state.
Yeah. On my mission, actually, it was interesting. I didn't. You know, I had the weird things of, like, parents, like, concerned or questioning, like, how they would treat me, you know, like, it's kind of like very, like, more of like, hey, who is this guy? But as they got to know me, like, literally the weirdest thing was happening. Like, after they got me knowing I'd been there for several months, they're like, you know what, I'd let you marry my daughter. Which is kind of like, you know, you look at it, I'm like, oh, okay, so, like, maybe I've done something good, like, but I'm like, yeah, I don't want to marry your daughter, but, like,
I'm on a mission now, so I'm not thinking about that.
But I'd get those experiences, which was really informative, right? Because they meant that they had a perception or something like. But I'm like, I'm just who I am. Like, I'm just pretty jovial. I try to be really nice to everybody, and especially as a missionary, you know, I just was like, no, I'm here for this purpose, and I'm here really to do this, and so. But I didn't have any really, I remember thinking back, and maybe I just was oblivious to it, but no, like every area I served in, people were just really respectful and kind as a mission, which I thought great. And my brother at the time actually was serving in the Salt Lake mission. So we were out for about 20 months at the same time. And he served in Salt Lake. So mostly Salt Lake, and then they split it, and he served in the West Valley and on the west side too. But he and I never really, I haven't talked too much about it, but he never mentioned ever having any experiences.
So speaking of, you have lived all over the world, not just as a young person, but since you've been an adult.
Yeah.
Where's the worst place you've experienced racism? Worst country, worst state, worst North Carolina?
Yeah, the interesting thing about North Carolina carries a different, for me as a person, it probably was North Carolina, just because, the first time I experienced it was one time I was going down the driveway to pick the mail up out of the mailbox, and we were living in this neighborhood that I realized we probably shouldn't have been living in as a little kid. But I saw a sticker on the mailbox with 3 Ks on it. And I went and told my mom, and she was like, I could just see, even to this day when I tell the story, I could see her face where she didn't say a word, but her facial expressions expressed everything: sadness, frustration, anger. And that's when, in the Black community, people talk about the talk. It's when you get to talk about, hey, what to do, when to do it, how to do it, all those things, right? And that's when I got to talk at probably 8 or 9 years old about hey, just be careful. And that's more scary, we lived in Arkansas for a period of time, and the KKK is pretty prevalent there. And I remember one time being out with missionaries, out and about, and out further from Bentonville, because I worked for Walmart at the time. And we were out, and they're like, hey, Brother Hugh, will you go knock on that door? I'm like, nope. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to get. I'm out in the country. I'm out in the woods. They see me coming into the door. I hate to have to think that way, but I'm like, there's a certain, I know the feeling of hey, just protect yourself. And it's a feeling that Utah's been different. When I lived here I went to school at BYU. I had a few experiences. One of the experiences I always remember is I was at a sporting event, and somebody said to me, hey, what sport do you play at BYU? And I was like, no, I'm here for the sports of academics. I'm super sarcastic. I just I'm here for the sport of academic. And the guy chuckled slightly, and he's like, oh, no. What sport are you really here for? Right? Because the only reason I could be at BYU is because I pay a sport.
Well, see, that's like a microaggression.
That's a microaggression, right? And I got several of those, right? When I was going to school. And yeah, I do look like an athlete. I have an athletic build. I could have played professional rugby and soccer, semi-pro, but I went an academic route. But it's been more so for my kids. When we came back in 2016, I didn't want my kids to experience this amongst people who profess to believe the same things that they do. Right. And within 6 months of living here, we moved here in September 2016. And it was January of 2017, the week of Martin Luther King Day. And I was sitting, it was Wednesday night, and I just remember this so distinctively. I was sitting with my daughter, who at the time was 6, so she's now 16. So we've been here for 10 years. And my son, I said, hey, how was your day? And I remember my daughter just telling me this. And she said to me, Dad, she's like, hey, a kid came up to me at the playground and said that Black people were ugly. Out of nowhere. She's just 6 years old, right? And luckily, this is my feisty daughter, so I was a little worried, just turn around and slap him, what she do. But she was mature enough to turn around and say, hey, don't judge me by my color, judge me by how I act. But that's because that's how we've had to raise our kids. You have to use your words to communicate, how you feel, and especially when people are using race, and so we've that in Utah, it's been different. And then with my calling, it's made it more heavy because I see it and hear it and get people's experiences, in random places. People tell me at the gym, when they find, everybody, literally I'm saying, people just express their experiences they've had, right? And that's made it harder because knowing, can I pinpoint it? Can I go and actually get the names of people that have done it and see if it's members of the church? Yeah, but I'm you're asking me to do a lot of work to do that. And by the way, which I'm actually thinking about doing, because sometimes I want to believe hey, if that's what it takes for you to see it, then let me show you. But I do have enough instances, where I can point to is it amongst members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? Yes. Is it all? No. But is there some? Yes, which is problematic.
Well, church leaders must acknowledge that. You had Russell Nelson and Dallin Oaks pretty forcefully and bluntly speaking out against racism and calling especially out members also. Do you think their words are making a difference?
I think here's the interesting thing about that. I didn't send this to you, but I built this kind of should build into more of a website, but I have this site that kind of has all the quotes that have been given, right? I think that what they have expressed has been great in my mind. Like one of the ones I use a lot is when President Nelson said we calls on members and citizens to abandon attitudes and actions of prejudice. But here's the thing. You can't really abandon your actions of prejudice. So the gentleman that yelled at me, right, can't abandon it if he doesn't really address the attitudes that he has. I think therein lies the problem. Because if you're a member of the church who expresses these things, or anybody for that matter, I can't change that action. I can't change them, saying these words or feeling this way until they change how they think about somebody. If they, like, even the gentleman that yelled at me, I was telling the police chief when he and I met last Monday, actually, I met with the police chief and I said, hey, I could prosecute this individual. They could go to jail, right? But I'm like, I'd really like to do more of a public forum. Like, let's talk this through. Let's sit down and talk about why you felt the need to express that, right? Like, where did you learn this? Like, why did you feel this way? I think it's those types of dialogues and conversations, but I think that's the point of it. Like, unless you do that, so all the invitations that we have are great, but unless people can acknowledge that they have that type of an attitude towards somebody, they're never going to change because it's like, well, I don't feel that way, right? Mm-hmm. And that's therein lies the problem, right? You don't, and I think the clearest one actually of this was when recently. When the BYU Idaho president, and I have that quote where he talked about this, where he spoke on this, and he talked about what it means. And he used the quote from Elder Dale G. Rendler when he talked about not throwing stones, but then the second step is to try to catch stones that are thrown by others. And he said these words, which I think were interesting. So this is Elder Alvin F. Meredith III, which actually I didn't know this until like months ago, but he actually he owns a house in my area. I grew up was living in Highland area. But he said this. He said, if you hear offensive racial language, even when framed as a joke, have the courage to speak up. If you see someone act with prejudice, do not look the other way. Silence may feel polite, but it is not Christ-like. But like that, I feel like that type of specificity, that's been more clear because like just saying not to and root it out, people are like, well, I don't do it. And I'm like, okay, but if you hear, are you doing anything? All right. And that I think that there's a next level of this now that I think people have to. It's not for me to own. I'm not the one doing it. I have some family members that may feel that way, extended family members, but
yeah. Ronell, I'm wondering because we were talking about some of the comments that we saw, people, and it seems like and people at least self-identified themselves as Latter-day Saints on some of the comments. They don't want to believe this happened. Is that part of the problem, though? Mm-hmm. Is that they don't want, you know what I mean? It's almost like silencing it.
Yeah. But that's the interesting thing about it. And it's like they don't want to believe it happens. And then when let me give you an example. During 2020, like that year for me was just like, it was very emotional for a lot of people, but just because of all the things. And I found myself like in between meetings. I worked at Adobe at the time, and I found myself in between meetings, leaving meetings, just crying. So like Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, like you're just like thinking like, what is this the world we're living? Can I just, if I like seriously go for a walk? Could something happen to me like that? Right? And people are like, oh, that would never happen here. I'm like, well, you try walking down the road and then seeing a truck drive by with a big Confederate flag. What am I supposed to think? Like, I'm in Utah. Like, why would there be a need to have a flag, a Confederate flag flying? Well, I'm Southern pride. You're not even from the South. Like, help me understand that, right? But I think it's kind of like when you admit it, then people are almost like, well, then I'm a problem. Like, and I was talking to, so a member of my state presidency and I were talking about this, and he's like, I feel like people, if they feel like they acknowledge it, they feel like they're actually doing it. I'm like, no, if you're a person that isn't doing it, great. But then what are you doing then to make sure it doesn't happen to somebody else? But it's almost like a fear of like, well, if I acknowledge it, then I'm saying that I may be a part of it, and maybe you are, maybe you aren't, right? But it's just fascinating to see like how I can stand back. It's not my problem. It actually isn't my problem because like how I respond is how I'll be judged. Great, that's how I feel about it. But I'm like if I don't address this, so I don't raise it, especially in my position right now, I'm creating a situation in my mind where I keep allowing it to happen. And that's one of the things I loved about, I go back to what President Oaks said back in 2020 as well, in his talk, what he gave, I think it says, love your enemies, where he talked about this. He quoted Teresa Adair, and he said, I got to find this because this is one of my favorite ones. But he said any remarks, right? Like he talked about if you're doing it, I'm just gonna paraphrase it. I can't find it, but he said pretty much if you like racism resides in passivity, indifference, and silence. And then he called on people to root out racism. But what I see a lot of, and there's a few other things that he had in there, but I'm like, I see a lot of indifference, a lot of passivity, right? And then silence. And not only that, they're trying to silence you from talking about it. And then it's like, okay, so I can't say anything, but hey, if I told you the hundreds of stories I hear about young Black kids in Utah and adults who have anxiety and nervous breakdowns, who don't want to go to their ward or go to their school, like kids their hair being pulled on and spit on because they're Black. You know, women in wards telling another woman that because she's Black that she's not valued and what she's doing is horrible, but it's because of the color of her skin. But I shouldn't have to tell you those experiences, right? Or the Latino brother who lived in Lehigh, who his neighbor, who was a member of a bishopric, said that essentially that we will never do anything to help you because of who you are. You know, there's only so much you can do when you hear these stories. Just like, really, like, do we not understand these things are happening? And by the way, if it's happening to one, right? Like, if it's happening to one person, we should care about it. Even if it's happening to one person, even if it's only one person doing it, like it has an impact on our community, because then it becomes this like, oh, we're okay. Now, and schools are a lot worse. Kids these days are just like using the N-word like it's like a second language for them, right? And they think it's okay. I'm like, but do you know the history behind the N-word? Do you know what you're manifesting, right? A neighbor of mine was telling me the other day, her son is at BYU. He was running, and he's Latino, right? And he had a bunch of kids, they were white boys in a truck, who drove up behind him saying, "Run, N-word, run." Like, so it's okay that can just be done, right? And be like, oh, we should just not even focus on it. Don't talk about it. It doesn't happen. And so I'm like, okay, so then these children of God who look differently should just take it and be like, okay. It's okay for me just to listen to it and just be like, that's what people do. It's okay.
So speaking of the Genesis Group and people, you as a presidency, you recently conducted a survey of members. Tell us about some of the findings. You alluded to the fact that they don't feel, a lot of them don't feel totally comfortable in their wards.
Yeah, you
don't have to tell us numbers, but just the general.
And we're going to do it again. We've been trying to do it quarterly, just to kind of more of a sentiment check. But one of the things that we realized when I first became Genesis Group president in January of 2024, I just was listening to people. And, if you know anything about Genesis Group, our purpose is really what the late Elder Ballard, President Ballard, shared, which is it's really to bring church members and others together as fellow citizens with the saints, and to encourage and support Black Latter-day Saints, right? We want their families and friends to build faith in Jesus Christ and to strengthen their membership in the restored church and foster unity. So that's what we're about. But in order to do that, one of the things we realize is like, well, how do we accomplish that? And then we have three main buckets to how we do that. The first is to build and strengthen the individual, so improving their lives through uplifting and educational activities. The second is to build and strengthen the Genesis Group, which is to create an environment where Black members feel supported, strengthened, and create friendships and can be themselves. And the third is the most interesting one, which I spent a significant amount of time just thinking about, but we talked about it with even the Utah presidency, is to improve and strengthen our ward, stakes, and communities, to create an inviting and uplifting community where Black members feel spiritually, emotionally, mentally, socially, and physically safe. And it's interesting because people are like, well, what do you mean they don't feel safe? And when I share experiences, right, like, so my experience, and we've actually defined all of these, right? So my experience I didn't feel mentally safe, socially safe, or physically safe, or even emotionally safe, right? And they're like, well, what do you mean by that? Well, here's physical safety definition. Feeling you will not experience physical harm, bullying, or threats. Emotional definition. Feeling you are accepted and valued for who you are, and feeling you can express yourself without recrimination. Mental safety. Feeling you belong and are able to participate without racist, prejudicial, or discriminatory remarks. And then social safety. Feeling that you are treated with respect, specifically as it relates to your ethnicity, culture, or race. And so, like, when we start using these with definitions, people are like, yes. Because what people were expressing to us initially were like, well, I don't want to go to my ward. I don't feel like I can get up and bear my testimony. People are talking about things in gospel doctrine and like saying things. Like my brother who lives in Spanish Fork had an experience where somebody gets up in a ward and pretty much said, what he said is like, hey, I'm glad we're a white, straight conservative church. you know, and you're just like, what, like, so, and then nobody, even no one, like, even when the gentleman carried on and like,
no one said anything.
Somebody finally said something. My brother told me, he's like, they finally said something where they're like, hey, we don't talk about people like that this way. But then my brother had a lot of people afterwards coming to his home and saying, sorry, that happened to you. But they weren't willing in the moment to say, hey, we don't agree with you. Right. But that's the safety, right? Like when you have that happening, like people are like, well, I don't want to go there. That's why people come to Genesis group, because like, hey, I still believe in the gospel of Jesus Christ and the church. But I'm like, I don't feel safe enough in my ward and in my stake, sometimes in my community to go. And sometimes those things are one and the same. Right. And so, and it's something that we want to dig even more. But where we did get a lot of numbers is like we asked people how many people did heard the training that was given in 2023 by Elder Gerard Carriere, who of 70, when they talked about it. And you know, I heard all sorts of things. I heard all sorts of like, hey, a bishop or bishops and stake presidents who say, well, we're not going to do that one. We're not going to talk about race, right? Like most of the people we saw, it's probably close to like 70% said, hey, no one ever talked about that in our ward. Didn't hear, had no discussion about it. Now, part of that could be because there's too many topics, but still, like it's such an important one where they didn't have, and like it's close to 70% of people. We had like 200 and something respondents, 283, almost 300 respondents that responded to that and say we didn't talk about.
Which means no one actually touched on that part of the discussion,
yeah.
even though even
when it was talked about, right?
Absolutely.
And so it's but safety is the catalyst for me. Like it's really the thing. Like, hey, we should all feel safe. By the way, when I talk about this, we do trainings and wards and stakes on this. I'm like, it's for anybody. What if you're somebody who's not a member of the church? What if you're from the LGBTQ community, right? What if you're a woman who's single? Like, what if it doesn't matter. What if you're on a different political side of things, right? Like, it doesn't matter. Like, everybody should feel safe coming to the church. You shouldn't feel like you're on the other side because you don't fit a certain category or believe things in a certain way.
So a lot of people are saying, and people in the story we wrote about, what do you attribute this rise? They seem to sense there's a rise in this racism. What do you, or your Genesis congregants say? What do they see as the reason that they think there's an increase right now, or that there is an increase?
Yeah, I think there's a lot. I think I'm one of these people that I had hope. Like I became, so my dad is American, my mom is Jamaican, British, but I didn't become a citizen until 2023, October 31st, 2023. And I was like, and I look at it and people are like, well, I'm like, no, like I didn't really get involved with politics, but I over the last 3 years and even longer than that, I'm like, I believe that, and I said this in one of my posts, I really believe and feel and have experienced it enough that, and many people have told me this that are, you can talk to Tamu Smith, you can talk to a lot of people, but they're like, hey, I think people have made politics their religion. And that's, and it's almost like they supplement the gospel of Jesus Christ with that. Like, okay, this part fits in there. Right. But
their politics is allowing room for racism. Yeah. That's what's,
and that's the thing I think that is interesting with it. And I hate, like, I'm like, anybody that knows me, I am not like, I don't like to talk about politics. You're never going to hear me tell you about what I believe when it comes to that, because it's personal. It's what I do and how I feel about it. But it's been, 2 years ago, actually it was 2024, we gave a series of talks that centered on this at Genesis Group. And one of the talks that I gave was like, being a discipled citizen, really focusing on the focus of that was like, how can we be a citizen, but also be disciples in how we're doing it? And really it came down to like, how are we treating other people? Even though if you believe something different, great. Right. But it feels, what I've learned from just like literally, and I get calls from Florida, Chicago, New York, like, all like Texas, Oakland, like all over the place. And people are saying like they feel it. I think in the story you had talked to Darius and he shared that. And it's kind of this, I don't think people see it because it's not impacting them. They don't see it, if they don't see it happening in their ward, or if they see it happening in their ward, but they're okay with the person's talking about, but do you see how that's hurting somebody else? Right. And I don't think they don't see that. And so I just from what I'm experiencing, what I hear and what I see, I'm like, have we really replaced loving others with like politics, which allows us to think of people and however that political view. And I don't care who you are. You could be on the liberal side or the conservative side. I really don't care. Right. But if you're using that as a way to treat somebody differently, as an inferior or less than, right, you're the problem. This is hands down. You're the problem. And I don't care. You can be on either side. I've seen it on both. And I'm just like, we can't do that. I mean, you can, I guess. And then we just have a place where people run around and you know, are horrible to each other. But so that's what I feel is the baseline. And this is my personal take on it, but it's also a lot of people that I've talked to that feel that as well. And by the way, it's been interesting. There's a lot of people I know who, on both sides, who are like, I agree with you. That's what, like, people reach out to me personally with text like, hey, I had a woman stop me at Costco, and like, I get people stopping me randomly now. Like, I'm like, put your face out there. I guess it just happens, but they're like, no, we agree with you, right? Like, they're like, what can we do to help? And I'm actually crafting another post where I'm going to talk about this. I'm like, hey, here's what we can do. Doesn't matter like where you sit. Like, we don't want this type of discourse in our community. Then let it be known. Let it be known to your public, your state and local officials. Like, hey, we don't care for this type of attitudes in our community.
Well, speaking of what can we do, what would you like to see you've quoted some of the leaders, church leaders, but what would you like to see them do to sort of stem the tide of this, the rise of racism and bigotry among members?
I think there has to be a level of discourse and really honest conversation. What I found, like, it's just, again, started with me in 2020. I got asked to I do a lot of firesides and a lot of conversations. What I found is when we would talk about this, it would create conversations in homes with families that would like to say, like, hey, how do we change? Like multi-generational homes, right? Last year, the church came out with, and specifically for the Utah area, which I think it could be hopefully taken broader, but Elder Taylor, who is incredible. Like, I mean, it's been incredible to get to know him and to work with him, but he did a whole training for seminaries last year that came out in May of last year, I believe, or April. That was for targeted word seminary for kids. Like, hey, we have to, as a part of the next, and we were involved in that through Genesis Group. And this is what people understand. I know more than I can actually share. But the point of it being is that's the type of, like, the next level for me is like, how do we have the same discourse and conversation with adults? Right? Because people will say, like, well, I don't know where my kids are getting it from. I'm like, well, if you're having conversations like this about people in your home, and then they go search the internet, then what do you think they're going to repeat? Like, so either you're being proactive about it and saying that's who we are, or you're just allowing it to happen and saying, well, we didn't know they felt that way. I'm like, well, you either did or you didn't. But I think there has to be a conversation about it. And one of the things that I believe too, we have to be clearer too, about our history, right? I don't think it's a problem. Like, I did a presentation at my daughter's school at her ward at BYU about this, where I said, hey, let's talk about Declaration number 2. Let's give you the history of it. And like, you take that as you want to see it, but like, then what do you do with that? Like, for me, I know the history, and I'm a better person of it for it. And my lived experience has been like, you're going to find people like that everywhere. It doesn't justify it.
Right. Declaration 2 being the priesthood ban ending.
Yeah.
Right.
And so it's interesting because I think there has to be more intentional conversations. And, like, you can call it trainings, like, lessons on, like, how do we do this? Because it's one thing to make the statement, which I think is great. It's one thing to facilitate. How do you actually talk about this, and how do you root it out? Like, what does that look like? And I feel honored because we get to play a part in that, because that's part of what we get to do as Genesis Group is like, okay, what does that look like? And I think some of just the events of this last couple of weeks have, like, okay, I've had somebody already reach out and say, hey, what can we do?
But do you think it needs to come from the top of the church?
I think it can. I mean, it has. But I think here's the thing that I always find is interesting. You can. There's so many. Like, I can tell you 30 different ways that this has been said, right? But until you point it out, and that's a balance that I'm wrestling with. Like, does it have to come from the top? I think there's power when it does. When it's said unequivocally that this is not. We don't condone this. We don't think this is appropriate. Elder Gerard Carrier talked about when he did this training that, this could be a potential of you not having, losing, your temple recommend, right? What is really the way that we get people to say, this is not okay? Like, where it clicks, where it's like, okay, I have to do some deep soul searching, right? Because at the end of the day, like, I could be, if this exists, my whole thing has always been, how are we going to gather Israel if that's really what we're about? When there's people that we're saying we are not going to gather. Because that's really it, right? Like, if we're saying, oh, this is there are people are saying, well, this is what it looks like. You have to be this, and you're on the outskirts because you're somebody different. Like, well, then who are we gathering? So I think Christ is gathering everybody. He's not selecting a few group of people.
Go ye into all the world, I think he said, right?
Yeah, go ye into all the world.
So, do you know the numbers? Do you know how many Black Latter-day Saints there are, say, in Utah?
No.
How big is the Genesis group?
Genesis group, we average about, I mean, it ranges, right, between like, say, 170 to like 300 people. And actually about a third, no more than probably half are Black. And that's the thing that's interesting about it. We get people from all walks of life, and it's because they feel safe there. Mm. We have people who haven't gone to church in years who come to Genesis group and they're white and they feel safe. And I'm all for it, because I'm like, hey, if you can come and this is a place where you feel the Spirit and you feel like you belong, then come and participate.
Is the size about right, or do you think it needs to expand? Or
I mean, it is. I mean, it's a what is it? It's optional, right? You you opt in. We did a Christmas devotional this last December, and we just kind of opened it up. We had I think it was like somewhere between 600 and 700 people that showed up, and we were only expecting 300, but people just kept coming. But it was just because we just did a Christmas devotional centered on music, and we had a speaker, Elder Taylor spoke, which was awesome too. But the music was 30 minutes, and it was just all about Christ, and it was soulful and enriching and just great performances. But I mean, it can be as big as like a Genesis group for me is a place where anybody, specifically Black Latter-day Saints, because that's our focus, should feel like they can come. And by the way, if you're not Black or if you're not a Latter-day Saint, you can come as well, right? My calling has been set apart specifically for Black Latter-day Saints. But I'm like, hey, if this is a place where you feel like you're loved and you're valued, then come be with us. It's a monthly devotional, the first Sunday of every month. We do it in Draper. And that's the purpose. And if people feel the Spirit and they feel that strengthening, the way I kind of positioned this with the area presidency at some point was Genesis group there is kind of like filling the bucket full of water, right? But what's causing the holes in the bucket are when they have negative experiences in their ward, stakes, and communities. And then you just have the water flowing out. So we're just kind of like filling it up when we can. And then hopefully
a lot of it stays in.
Okay, last question. What's your message to our listeners and readers about being Black Latter-day Saint in Utah? What do you want them to take away from this podcast?
That's a good question. I guess my thought would be, or my message would be, your Black Latter-day Saints, and just in general, when I talk to just Black people in general here, they want to be here, but they want to feel like they're a part of the community. They don't want to feel like they don't belong or are on the outside. And anybody who's listening, we each play a role in that. Like I do that for anybody in my community. If anybody's new to my community, I want them to feel like they belong. I don't care what your political beliefs are. I don't care what your sexual orientation is. Like that's none of my, like, none of my business actually. But it's like, you're a person that's in my community. I want your welfare to be considered and taken care of. I want to be, and I think as when I talk to a lot of folks, again, almost across like different ethnic groups, they're like, we just want to feel like we belong. And it's not like you can make that happen, but the way you make it happen, I guess you can make it happen, is by how you treat people, right? How you talk to them, things that you say, how you engage them in your community. And that, I mean, those are my thoughts. And the message would be like, how do we, like, we all owe that, as we have that responsibility. We can all do it in different ways. Right. But that's what I would say, from a person who's, I've been here now for 10 years and I love where I live, even in spite of this experience. There's incredible people where I live. Friends, they're from all backgrounds, mostly white. And they've been supportive, kind, helpful in all the ways. And that's what it should be. Like when I had this experience, I mean, people are like, hey, we're here with you. We stand with you. What can we do? And help us to know how we can better support you as it relates to this. And that's what it should feel like. You don't want anybody to feel like they're othered in a way. But, that's the opportunity that we have. And the question is, will we rise to that occasion?
It's been fascinating and important. Ronell Hugh, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks to Dave Noyce.
Always a pleasure.
And to our producer, Jose Davila. We remind our listeners they can keep up on all the happenings in and about the church by subscribing to the Salt Lake Tribune's free Mormon Land newsletter. Just go to sltrib.com to sign up, and we'll talk again next time on Mormon Land.